and love, everybody. Ringo here. Beautiful day in LA.
So, it was good to be able to kind of get it out in a song.
The whole, origin of where we're all coming from.
I'm prepared for death because I don't believe in it. I think it's just getting out of one car and getting into another.
Hello and welcome to Talk More Talk, a Solo Beatles video cast, where we talk about all things solo, and yes, some Beatles definitely comes in there as well. We thank you for joining us tonight. We have got a full show planned. We got a lot of discussion. So thank you for joining us, and we of course want you to contribute to the conversation. Tonight's topic is going to be about John Lennon's main influences on his life, on his artistry, namely Yoko Ono and Paul McCartney. So it's going to be a fascinating topic. But we will get to that in a little bit. We have news to cover, and I'm going to give you a brief report on a recent Paul McCartney concert I've seen. So let's get to it. First of all, my name is Kit O'Toole. I am the author of Songs We Were Singing, Guided Tours Through the Beatles' Lesser-Known Tracks, and Michael Jackson FAQ, All That's Left to Know About the King of Pop. And I am so lucky to be hosting this show twice monthly with these wonderful gentlemen who are our friends, colleagues, experts, you name it. So let me introduce everybody. First off, he is the author of so many books, and take up half the show to list all the books, but they're all wonderful, including the 2-volume biography of George Martin, Maximum Volume and Sound Pictures, and he has a book coming out this October, I believe, about the 50th anniversary of Abbey Road. I know we're all looking forward to that. He is the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at Monmouth University, and he is a huge fan of cats and 3D photography. So let's welcome Dr. Ken Womack. Hey, Ken.
Hey, Kit. Very nice to see you.
Good to see you. All right. Next up, we've got, you know him, you love him. He's the co-host of the popular Paul McCartney podcast, Two Legs, and he is one of the biggest vinyl collectors I've ever met. If you want to know about vinyl, you ask this guy. So say hello to Mr. Tom Hunyadi. Hey, Tom.
Hi, Kit. Hi, everybody. And Ken Womack, I'm really looking forward to I Am Lemonade Lucy. I was going to pick that up and give that a read. He's not just a Beatles author. He's also an author of many different topics. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. Appreciate it.
Yep. Absolutely. And last but definitely not least, he is a well-known person in the Beatles world. He is the longtime host of the syndicated radio show Every Little Thing, as well as the co-host of the very popular podcast Things We Said Today, along with Darren DeVivo and Alan Kozin. And he is a walking encyclopedia of music. You want to know about chart positions, you want to know about covers, he's your man. So I'm thrilled to introduce my friend, Mr. Ken Michaels. Hey, Ken.
Hey, Kit. I could be a walking encyclopedia because I have the Beatles encyclopedia right by my side. That's Ken's book.
Nice placements.
I wasn't even planning this.
Nicely played.
We collaborate together.
Yeah,
yep.
Very good.
Well, we have a name where you would do that. It's not beyond.
Oh, that's funny. All right. Well, as I mentioned, we have got a full show tonight. So before we get to our main topic, let's get to the news. So, Ken, take it away. What news have you got for us?
Okay, we start with the very sad news that we do have to talk about the Passing of Dr. John, a legend in the music industry, whose music was tough to define because it crossed so many different musical genres, but he did record a good 24 albums in his career. But for Beatle fans, we know him for working on 3 of Ringo's albums, the Goodnight Vienna album, also Ringo's Rotogravure and the Bad Boy album. And of course, he was there for Ringo's first all-star band tour. So a big part of Ringo's life. And I always think about, because I play the song quite frequently on every little thing, the song Ooh Wee from Goodnight Vienna, because not only did Dr. John play a piano solo in the middle, you can hear Ringo saying, "That's my doctor playing." So I love the song for that reason. And, you know, a big figure in the music industry, a big loss. Anybody want to comment on it?
Well, I mean, he was really one of a kind. I mean, I just, you know, I was thinking about it after he passed. I mean, who can you compare him to? I mean, it's really, yes, he directly descends from traditional New Orleans music, but he made it his own. He turned it into something else, you know, a kind of a collab, you know, just a mixture of all different styles. And of course his look, you know, his stage presence, you know, as I said, he's an original. I mean, there will never be anyone else like him.
Right.
Right. You know, I can't say that I've been the biggest Dr. John fan. I do appreciate his work that he did with Ringo and the fact that he was a part of that first all-star band. You know, I'm a big fan of the movie The Last Waltz. I like the band. I'm a fan of the work the work he did for that, and I also appreciate the work he did for the Art of McCartney. His cover of Let 'Em In, I think, was one of the better covers that were on that compilation tribute CD. So.
Wow, I've got to hear that. I'm not familiar.
I've never heard that. Wow.
Really,
What's Let 'Em In?
good. Yeah, it is quite good, and of course, the loss for New Orleans and that culture is irreplaceable.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Other news. Back in 1998, there was a posthumous collection, compilation of Linda McCartney music, of all of her recordings from the early 70s through the late 90s, called Wide Prairie. And now, to celebrate the first UK showing of the Linda McCartney retrospective, which is a look back at Linda's photography work curated by Paul, Mary, and Stella. Wide Prairie is being reissued on colored vinyl first. Tom already knew about this before anybody. This is exclusively for a month at the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery in Glasgow, Scotland. And after that, to the general public on August the 2nd on colored vinyl. It'll be white and blue, plus classic black vinyl, also digitally and on streaming services. And it will be the first time since 1998 that the album was made available on vinyl. I haven't heard anything about CD, though.
Okay.
All right. Really good collection. It's everything you'd ever want on one CD from Linda McCartney. The songs that she sang, some of them she wrote with Paul. Really good. All the Wing stuff, everything throughout the years, 3 decades worth right there. How's this for a pleasant surprise? The Queen of England's birthday honors were announced a few weeks ago, and both Mike McCartney, Paul's brother, and Elvis Costello were among the recipients. Now, Elvis will be getting an OBE for services to music in a career spanning more than 40 years. Mike McCartney will be getting a BEM, which is British Empire Medal, for his services to the community in Merseyside. Mike has had a career with the comedy trio The Scaffold, also carved out a niche as a very talented photographer. And this will be a big year for Mike because, as we've been talking about it, the McGear album is about to be reissued. It's now been delayed again to July the 19th. It's the full album of McGear, which came out in 1974, which has Paul all over it and members of Wings, an album of outtakes along with that, and a DVD with a couple of interviews with Mike McCartney on there, and the video for Leave It. So big year for Mike McCartney. Also, Mark Lewison, our good friend, is going to do a tour of the UK, which will be called Hornsey Road, The Surprises and Delights of Abbey Road, the Beatles' final album, 50 years on. This will be a 2-hour live theater presentation with stories behind the songs and the momentous events that went on in the studio while recording the album. The tour's website is hornseyroad.net. I'll spell that for you, HORNSEYROAD.net. The tour starts September 18th, runs through December the 4th. 21 dates, all in the UK so far.
Yeah, if it's anything like that White Album, presentation that he did, everybody that's going there is up for a real nice treat. I mean, that presentation he did, I'm sure what it ended up lasting 3 hours, and it was supposed to be 2, and it just kept going on and on and on. And all this wealth of information that we got from that presentation was just amazing, and I'm so envious of everybody that gets to, because there's no U.S. dates, it's all overseas, right, Ken?
It's all the UK right now. I think they'll just be testing the waters just to see if it does well, and then hopefully I'd love to see it come over here in the US. But yeah,
if you're watching or listening to this, please bring this to the US. I mean, I think you'll get a very good response here.
And on my podcast things we said today, I already offered Mark my house if he needs it.
Right.
So I was suggesting, why shouldn't it be all the homes of co-hosts of Beatle podcast shows?
There you go.
I think that would work really well.
Yeah.
Sort of like
right here.
Yeah.
Other news, in celebration of John and Yoko's public debut concert, Cambridge 1969, a Yoko Ono art exhibit called Sky Pieces will be running at the Hyang Gallery. That's at Downing College in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with a collection of 90 of her early, recent, and new works, with new pieces concerning the sky. This will work well in our conversation in a few moments. Some of them are participatory and they evolve as the exhibition unfolds. The centerpiece is called Sky TV, which is a closed-circuit camera that will record the sky, transmitting real-time views through a network of 25 television monitors into the gallery. There'll be screenings of her films Fly and Apotheosis, both co-directed by John Lennon. There'll be a day-long symposium with international scholars exploring the many facets of Yoko's work to date. And that will run, it's already running, June 15th through October the 6th. All right. Today marks the 10th anniversary of Meat Free Monday, a campaign started by Paul, Mary, and Stella McCartney to get the world to take one day out of the week and go meatless to help save animals and save climate change. And now there's a new video online with Paul, Ringo's in it, Mary, Tom Hanks, Alec Baldwin, and Kevin Nealon. There's also a separate one that Paul made all by himself, where he's strumming the guitar talking about it. I know some of our Beatle fans are fans of Harry Nilsson, and I want to let you know there's a new tribute album to Harry Nilsson coming out June the 21st called This Is the Town, a tribute to Harry Nilsson, Volume 2, on the label Royal Potato Family. It has 14 cover versions of Nilsson music from the likes of Cheap Trick, Martha Wainwright, Laura Ruth Ward. The label put out a tribute album for Harry with the same title, This Is the Town, Volume 1, in 2014. Danny Harrison is in the news. As we know, he's about to go on tour with Jeff Lynne's ELO. He just posted online on his Facebook page a performance. It's about an hour long with his band performing songs from his solo album In Parallel. It's called In Paralive, and it's still online. And I believe I've shared it. I have shared it on my Facebook page. I think I put it on our page, but you might want to check it out if you want to see Danny in action with all of his songs with this band. And of course, let's end our news by saying a very happy birthday to Paul McCartney, who tomorrow turns 77, believe it or not. Wow. Happy birthday, Paul.
Wow.
And speaking of Paul, how's this for a segue?
Yes,
Kid went to see him in concert, so we want to hear your report.
Well, it was he never disappoints. I mean, he played to, I would say if it wasn't a full house, it was darn close. I mean, I only saw like a, few seats around me that were empty. It was, just he didn't really vary from his set list from other shows, except for the second track, second number, he played Save Us instead of Junior's Farm. Which I was a little disappointed because I love Junior's Farm, so I would have loved to have heard that. I don't know why he switched it out. A mutual friend of ours, Ed Chen, who hosts When They Was Fab podcast, said, "Did Madison, Wisconsin, have any like a connection to Save Us? Is that why he played it?" No, not that I'm aware of. There's no connection. So just apparently felt like doing that. Little fireman that night.
That makes me nervous now. Because
he does a little tweaking at times. But the rest of the set list was pretty much standard. I would say two of my favorite moments were, even though I've seen him do Here Today, number of times. It was particularly moving that night. And what was really amazing was this was a huge venue where I saw him. I mean, really huge. And when he was playing that, you could hear a pin drop in the place. No woos or "I love you, Pauls" or anything like that. I mean, it was just silent. I've never been to a concert that size where seeing someone have that kind of command over the audience. I mean, that just knocked me out. I was really moved. And, everybody talks about the voice. The voice is what it is. But in that song, for Here Today, by sounding a little more fragile, that actually just added to the poignancy of that track. I mean, it just really did. And so even though I've seen him do that a number of times, it was very moving. That was really moving performance. And Helter Skelter, I mean, the crowd just went nuts. It's just so fun to watch this almost 77-year-old, doing Helter Skelter. I mean, it's just a treat. Now, I don't remember if Ken and Tom, you asked me this off camera last week or last episode, or if we talked about this on camera, but you did ask, so what was the bathroom run song or beer run song of the concert? The answer is My Valentine. Yeah. My Valentine was by far, I thought it was going to be an Egypt Station track. That was my guess. No, it was My Valentine. A number of people, walked out during that. So I don't know. I wonder how much longer he's going to keep it in. I who knows? But yeah, that was by far the beer run song.
And he didn't do it with the megaphone like he did for the
Grand Central Station.
Grand Central Station.
Yeah. Nope, he just did it
once
straight.
He did that, I thought he would have continued doing that because I thought that was kind of unique add-on to that song.
Yeah, no, he didn't. Now, I almost neglected to mention the horns. What a welcome addition that is. I know a number of us have been, for years saying bring back the horns, and thankfully he did, and boy, did they make a difference. Hearing here, there, and everywhere. Got to Get You Into My Life, hearing the real horns. Wow. And Letting Go. That was another highlight, hearing the horns on Letting Go. I had heard somebody posted a Facebook video of those and of that one of the performances, and that really, I thought, oh, this is going to be great. That didn't disappoint. So the only thing I would say is I hope in future tours he might add like one or two more horns. I'd love to hear them a bit more and really have them in, really in the forefront. But to have any at all is just such a treat. So, he knows how to put on a great show. Of course, I recommend, if those of you watching haven't seen him yet, go see him. And it's a great time, and you will find yourself moved at moments where you'll be kind of surprised, where you think, I've heard this song so many times, how can I possibly, and yet, darn it, he pulls it off every time.
you just get caught up in the moment, I think, and like you said, I mean, yeah, he's played these songs over and over again, but it doesn't matter. You're there, and it's, you feel the energy from the rest of the crowd, and it's the moment,
It's knowing that you're in the presence of this greatness and the history and everything that he brings to it. And yeah, the whole thing about the horns, Kit, I'm right with you. There have been fans out there who have been talking about this since Wings Over America, that they want horns back again. And as great as Wix is, it's not the same thing getting the horn sound on a synthesizer as it is with the real thing. And I will say, if you take a look at the set list from show to show, he has a habit, and he's been doing this for years. Usually the second, sometimes the fourth song, he switches from show to show. So if you see two shows in a row, it's never exactly the same. There might be one or two songs different. So like you said, Junior's Farm and Save Us, he flip-flops with them. Can't Buy Me Love is a song that he switches, I think, with Got to Get You Into My Life.
Okay, I was going to say, I don't remember him doing Can't Buy Me Love. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's been doing that at some of the shows here. So it's a good thing if you see two shows in a row. Because it's never exactly the same, but yeah.
Right. So I guess the main question is then, Kit, were you able to get a hot dog during the show?
Oh, there were tons. Actually, you know what? That's really funny. And now that I think of it, because I did have, because this is Wisconsin, darn it, you're going to have it was like a 4-cheese mac and cheese, and it did have some brats in it. So they did serve some meat. So shame on me. I shouldn't have done that. Darn it. Sorry, Paul. I forgot.
Was it on a Monday?
And no, it wasn't. It was a Thursday. Okay,
right.
Good. Okay, so that's useful.
And by the way, when I've seen him in the last few years, when he does My Valentine, a lot of people leave during that song. But I've always said it has nothing to do with the quality of the song. It has to do with the familiarity of it. And if you need to take a bathroom break, you're going to do it during a song that you don't know, more so than one that you're familiar with. So I saw people get up to leave during In Spite of All the Danger at one of my shows. And even though it had all that history behind it, how important that song was, a lot of fans didn't know about that song. So it's just the way it is.
The worst experience I had as far as that goes is I was up in the rafters, Janine and I were, in, I guess, 2005 on that tour. And Blackbird was just about to start. And this fellow who was sitting on the other side of us got up to leave. And I said, "What are you doing? He's going to play Blackbird. Come on, this is a big moment." And he went away, and then he came back right as Blackbird ended, and he had the giant Twix bar. And I've thought about that a lot, because it's as though that need for the giant Twix bar was more important than hearing Blackbird.
And that giant Twix bar probably cost as much as the ticket did.
I doubt that, but it was still, it was a value proposition. It was as though he suddenly had to have that Twix. It was unstoppable. It's sometimes like people are at their home, right? And they're watching a show, except they happen to be out, in this case, in D.C. at this huge arena.
That is, wow. Wow, that is crazy. Well,
Twix.
Yep.
Take the tea away. What do you got?
Yep. And by the way, a few people have put it before we leave this topic. People have been adding their own the shows we've seen, what the bathroom break songs were. Our pal Mean Mr. Mayo. Hey Joe. Hello.
We got married.
Yep, we got married.
That's a shame. That's a great song.
I like that song. Yeah, I mean that's
Yes, Love Me Do was a good one to leave during.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, yep. That was. I didn't see as many leave for that. Let's see. We've got
P.S. Love Me Do.
Oh, the P.S. Love Me Do, kid.
Oh, P.S. Love. Oh, sorry. I only heard. I was like, well, it's not one of my all-time favorite. I wouldn't leave. Oh, P.S. Love Me Do. Yes, I would. Even I would leave. Let's see. We've got Peace in the Neighborhood, which I've actually always kind of liked that song.
I love that one.
Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, it's not one of his top, 5 best songs or anything, but it's kind of good. And Sea Moon, that's one that Paul loves that song. He just will not stop playing it. Do you?
Yeah.
He does it a lot in sound checks now, I've noticed.
Yeah.
I do not want to be L7.
It was probably a favorite of his and Linda's.
Yeah.
And that's why he keeps doing it at sound checks, and he has done it in concert too.
Yep.
So.
That's true. Oh, dear, my buddy Tom Green from Dubuque, Iowa, said I saw him at the United Center in Chicago in 2002. So did I. And people would leave during Vanilla Sky. Yeah, that's kind of true. I do sort of remember. Yeah, that was a bathroom break song at the time.
Again, less familiar songs.
Yep.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's a reflection of the quality.
Yeah, that's true. So.
Except in the case of P.S. Love Me Do.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe.
Maybe. He pushed it with that one. So he really pushed it. Oh man. So yes, so as I said, if you haven't gone already, go to his current show. Of course, you'll have a great time. And as I mentioned, you'll be moved at some parts that you'll be kind of surprised that you're still moved by them. It's really just a great show. All right, let's move on to our main topic. Ken, why don't you introduce the topic which a viewer sent in to us?
Yeah, if you go back to our show number 14, and we always love to read our comments as we're doing the show here, the listener comments, and the ones that we get after the show. But we were talking about the new John and Yoko documentary, Above Us Only Sky, and I made the comment that I think that Yoko is the biggest influence ever on John Lennon's life. Well, one of our viewers wrote in, and this viewer's name is David Jackson. Don't know if you're watching, David. But he wrote in and he said, Paul McCartney was the biggest influence on John Lennon and vice versa. When I saw this comment, I thought, this might make a good debate here. So I asked my 3 co-hosts and they said yes. So I think this can make a very interesting conversation between Paul and Yoko and who was the bigger influence on John.
All right, and so now before we start this, I the viewers we have right now, I know many of them, so I know they're not going to fall into this. But we're just saying, sometimes when a topic when it involves Yoko, it can invite some negative comments. So we're just asking, please keep the discussion civil. We want debate. We want if you want to disagree with us, but just stay on the topic. Nothing personal. So, all right, let's start. So let's look at John and Paul first. They meet in 1957. They are brand new to music. I mean, they're still in their formative years and trying to learn. Now, Dr. Ken, how would you characterize? What do you think the John and Paul songwriting team partnership? What do you think the dynamics were there? Do you think they learned from each other? Do you think one taught more, taught one of the other more than the other did? What do you think was the kind of their working relationship?
Well, it was clearly a dynamic partnership, and it was, I think, importantly, the first partnership, which is significant because life is chronological. And Paul didn't just bring himself to the equation. He brought a tradition that was developed by Jim Mack's jazz band. John didn't simply maybe glean off of Paul's more superior musical knowledge at that time. John brought, his own flair for literature from his grade school education that had a deep impact, the use of irony and John's affectation with language. So, they were bringing a lot of tools to that partnership. And I think probably most importantly, in some ways, when you think about a lot of the great art of the 20th century, they were bringing their youth, right? They had bundles of energy and they were willing to take risks that other folks their age were not. I mean, how many would not have gone to Hamburg, right? So they're bringing a lot of elements in their respective quivers, and it made all the difference, right? They were able to weather several years of stop and starts with the Quarrymen and other different, band diffusions they had at that time, and it made all the difference. They stayed in it, if you will. And again, that can be attributable to youth, ambition, the fact that they like being together and they still believed that they would go to the toppermost of the poppermost. But it's a rich dynamic for sure.
Absolutely. And so Ken M., how do you think? So we have this dynamic partnership, but what do you think John got out of this partnership? Well, how do you think he learned? What did he learn? Do you think as a songwriter, as an artist, as I guess a person in general?
There's so much. It's very complicated. I just think that both John and Paul were already influenced by other artists, especially 50s rock and roll, and they brought that to the table. Especially John with Chuck Berry in particular, and Buddy Holly was an influence, not just on John, but on Paul and all the Beatles, Carl Perkins, those people. And I think just the mere fact that they were together all those years, they honed their craft together. But at the same time, I also think that the Beatles were made up of 4 strong individuals with individual styles that they all brought to the table. And John and Paul had individual styles when they started together, and they had already started writing songs on their own. Then they started writing songs together. But there's so much that they could have contributed and did contribute to each other's songs. But at the same time, on the songwriting end, I see them as being very individualistic. I'm not saying that there wasn't an influence there. I think that they added so much to each other's songs in the Beatles through the arrangements, the instrumentation, Paul's bass line on John's songs, for example, the harmony work, all that the Beatles brought to the table to the arrangements. But the songwriting, I think, was kind of built in early on. But there's all kinds of examples where they helped each other out songwriting-wise. And I think that one of the things that Paul has cited as being very important is the fact that they were not a formula band. There were songs that were 50-50 collaborations. There were songs that were 80% John, 20% Paul. Whatever worked, they went with it. And that's something that carried on into their solo careers. Paul, so much more than John, likes to bring up the Beatle years when he has a new album out and talk about what the Beatles did and their approaches to recording, that he and John would write a song and bring it to George and Ringo in the early years, and they hadn't heard the song and they had to learn it quickly. That whole process was something that they did in the Beatle years that Paul tried to capture in his solo careers, but that's also something that he did with John, writing those songs together. They brought so much to each other that it's really hard to quantify. But I still think that, even early on, if you listen to the early Beatles music, if let's just say there was an unreleased Lennon McCartney song that you never heard before, and you don't hear John sing it or you don't hear Paul sing it, someone else is singing it, somehow you can tell whether John wrote it or Paul wrote it. They still had individual styles from the very beginning, but they added a lot to each other's songs in so many different ways. And, I can pinpoint certain things like, for example, I Am the Walrus is a song that has stream of consciousness lyrics. I think Paul used that same approach with the song, Talk More Talk. Did he do that because John did it? Was he influenced by John? He never admitted that, but I think in so many different ways. Counter melodies they worked on together, and that showed in a lot of Paul's solo music. Was that a John influence? You don't really know for sure. They brought all their influences together, especially the 50s rock and roll, and both John and Paul did like pre-rock and roll too, and you combine all that and you've got this incredible catalog where you really can't say with every single song what the influence was, but that just the mere fact that they were there together, working on it together, perfecting it, and blossoming and growing as it went along, that made Paul a huge influence anyway on John and vice versa.
Absolutely. Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, between the Kens, Ken, Womack said their ambition and their they were motivated, and Ken Michael said they were already influenced with that style of music. So I think those two things combined were what really formed that partnership. They had something that they related to, and then it just blossomed from there, and then each other helped each other with their weaknesses, whereas like John may not have played the guitar like a banjo, and maybe Paul helped him out and influenced him to be a better player, or there were John might have been stronger lyrically at the time, and then maybe he helped influence Paul to be a stronger songwriter. I mean, but there's just so many things like Ken said. I mean, you really can't pinpoint influences, but the fact that they stuck together during those early years. I mean, how many times were they close to they weren't finding any gigs for a while? They could have separated, but they kept working, and it was the influence, I think, of each other that kept that dynamic duo together, and the fact that they loved the music, and the fact that I think that they were getting better, and then especially working all those years in Hamburg, and where I think John had a stronger stage presence maybe than Paul, and then Paul may have been influenced by by that, and then maybe Paul had a little bit more musicality with his playing, and then John was influenced to be better in that way. But I think that when you look at it, it's clear that at that point in time that they were both a tight unit and very influenced by each other. Just a
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And as I was thinking about this topic, I was thinking about the ways, kind of like what I think it was Tom Green said earlier here, which was that Paul kind of made John step it up. And I mean, in a way, I think that's true. I also think I think they had this effect on each other, that they encouraged each other to try new things. Like Paul loved character pieces. For example, of course, Eleanor Rigby and so forth, and, writing in the third person. And John finally, tried his hand at it with, Nowhere Man. Of course, later on, Mean Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam. I mean, and he did it in a different way, perhaps than Paul, and a bit more humorous in the case of the latter two songs. But I think he was trying also a song like In My Life, where he really bared his soul a bit more, but in a way that it was commercial, but still high art, and I think Paul, that may have been part of the influence that Paul had on him, that, encouraging him to write from different perspectives, and also from, thinking about it from, how will this appeal to a mass audience without sacrificing, too much. You don't want to dumb it down, but you want to make it accessible to as many people as possible. So, I'm not sure, Ken Womack, do you think, do you think there are specific techniques that Paul may have, taught John or somehow influenced him to try? As I've been trying to think of other examples.
Well, it's such a, in a lot of ways, they created a dynamic inter-influence or intra-influence, if you will, by being present at that very fecund time, right? That was enormous in terms of their growth. And of course, it was a spotty growth at a certain point. They had unparalleled fame, which created its own kind of wedges, different sort of family lives and structures. So it becomes easy to dismiss them as being very individualistic at a certain point. But as they would both say, it was sometimes the little things that made all the difference. The smoky electric piano on Come Together, right? That John valued, or that amazing Epiphone Casino electric guitar solo that John Lennon plays on Honey Pie. They were both really the little touches that made those songs extra special. I can't get over that. I listen to it quite often. Just by itself, that beautiful little solo John plays on that song, it sounds like a clarinet. In fact, he's moving in and out of the woodwinds with ease, the way he works the casino. That's what they do for each other. And those made all the difference in those later songs to my ears.
Yeah. I mean, something like probably the tape loops in Tomorrow Never Knows, or, John's, contribution to songs like She's Living Home and Getting Better, those little, musical and lyrically, those contributions, I think both, helped and influenced each other grow as artists as well.
Also, you mentioned Come Together. The bass line from Paul is as much a part of that song as the song.
For sure.
Or the introduction that Paul brought on the Mellotron for Strawberry Fields Forever. That was his idea, But there you're talking about what you're bringing with the instruments and what you're playing as opposed to the songwriting, which is a separate thing too. Mm-hmm. So, like I said, it's a complicated thing. And also there was the competitiveness between the two of them. And it was a healthy competition, and it spurred each other on to create some of their greatest songs. I mean, Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane, a lot of people rate as possibly their greatest single. Hey Jude and Revolution, writing them at the same time. What one guy did, the other one bounced off of, and they wanted to, up their game. So I think in that way, it was definitely an influence in that way.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
And before I lose my terrible memory would drop this, but as far as intellectual or craft influences, I think Paul deserves a lot of credit for the relationships he forged in literary London in the mid-1960s that John then directly benefited from.
Yeah.
The Indica Shop, John Dunbar,
right.
The whole art collective. That was coming by way of Paul, and it was enormous for John to have that outlet, particularly in a time, right after or even during the Fat Elvis period, as Lennon would call it. Paul was his intellectual connection, and was very generous about being so. In fact, it was that intellectual connection that leads him to the other influencer we're going to talk about today. It's a huge conduit, and it was McCartney in that mid-period saying, remember, I love the quote, I vaguely mind what anyone knowing things I don't know about. And so quite suddenly, he's schooling himself in literature, and Paul is stretching his chops in a lot of ways. And of course, part of that is probably going back many years to the influence from John, when he cared a little bit more about that aspect of their studies. Yeah. That's such a vital period and made such a difference. I mean, for the rest of John's life, he is thinking about some of the intellectual freight that he picked up during that mid-60s period.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because you can read about that here in the Zappo Diaries by Barry Miles. It's a pretty good book about all that, the Zappo years and all of the the things that Paul was, like you said, learning about, all the avant-garde stuff that Paul was discovering while he was in London, and then John being was he out, not necessarily in London, living in the countryside. Yeah. So him bring all that information back to John. I mean, it's
what's amazing about that, though, is they were so privileged, right, given the quality and different nature of their fame, that they could do these things where other people, were having to hustle. The lesser-known acts had broken down. They were on the cabaret circuit by that point. These guys were very privileged to be able to do that. And it was an intra-influence, right? Paul knew to do that because of that connection they've been having for so very long, I would argue. But that's
it's kind of interesting, and I brought this up a few times on the other podcast things we said today. It is really fascinating that while Paul was studying avant-garde stuff and he was into all this before John, and then John got into it, why didn't the two of them do more work in that area instead of John going right to Yoko with it?
Well, yeah.
Well, to quote Alan Saunders, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans.
It's true. Well, since you mentioned Yoko, this is a good segue here. All right, so we've talked about ways that Paul and John worked together, perhaps what they taught each other, their the complicated dynamics. So let's move on to Yoko now. John, meets Yoko for the first time in '66, and starts learning more. Of course, we know the story about him going up the step ladder with the magnifying glass and seeing the word "yes" on the ceiling, and he's there you go, and he. Ken is illustrating. For those who are listening, Ken is illustrating the moment. He's reenacting it. And so, so what? How do you think his, her influence differs? Okay, John just wrote yes. There you go.
Yes is the answer.
Yes is the answer. Well, and that's a good segue. How did Yoko influence his music? Because to me, her fingerprints are all over his 70s stuff. I mean, up until his death, I think you can just hear it in lyrics, in more experimental things he's trying. I mean, the Utopian national anthem. Come on, that's Yoko. I mean, something like that. So what do you guys think? So Tom, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all starts with yes. It's that positive feedback that maybe he was looking for. And yeah, I mean, I think Womack mentioned it earlier that maybe he was losing interest in what he was doing and he needed another outlet, and maybe that's why he didn't contribute more with Paul in that avant-garde forum. And all roads to Yoko, I think, start with Paul. I mean, Paul was the one that probably introduced Yoko's work to John. And so with that being said, I think the bigger influence on John might have been Yoko, because of one thing that I think gets overlooked, and it's the motherly influence that he had on John. I think growing up, I mean, was one of your biggest influences in your life is your mother, I think. And I think him having that with Yoko in his life, I think that became, his influence for the rest of his life in so many ways, including, with art and life and his music. And there's just so many different things you can say that she influenced, him by. But I think it all started with that word yes, and that positive outlook that maybe he was looking for.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you mention, that the mother figure, because of course John called Yoko mother. That was, and he definitely viewed her as sort of a guiding light in a way. So, Ken M, what do you think?
Well, I do believe that Yoko was the biggest influence ever on John's life, because John was, at least I believe, the type of person that grew restless very easily. He was always on to the next thing. And Yoko Ono defied convention, everything that John had been doing, even though the Beatles were constantly evolving and growing and introducing new things in the studio. And the Beatles had 100% freedom by the time that they got to Sgt. Pepper. But with Yoko, it was like freedom to infinity. Anything could be considered art. If you want to create 2 minutes of silence on your album, that's acceptable. If you want to have a baby's heartbeat on your album, that's acceptable. And John was just really drawn to this. He was completely fascinated by Yoko and the way her brain and her mind works. So many things that Yoko does to this day is unlike what anybody else comes up with, and I think he was drawn to the fact that he didn't understand everything that Yoko was doing. He loved her artwork. He liked her music. He defended her music. And while a lot of people seem to think that all of her music was just screaming, well, you should listen to her whole catalog and you'll have a different point of view altogether. Right. But he defended her work. He was involved with her films, like Fly, for example. Who else? Well, I guess this was in the avant-garde world. But for a woman to be naked with a fly crawling over her body and making a film out of that, or a film where you're looking at people's rear ends naked and nothing else. I mean, that could only come out of the mind of John, out of Yoko, but John supported that. And I think that she affected his music. I think his lyrics were much more personal and bared his soul more so than ever before. I can't say you have to give Yoko all the credit for that, but the mere fact that she shared, the primal scream therapy with John, I don't think you would have had a Plastic Ono Band album. Well, both John and Yoko made their own, but that wouldn't have happened without Yoko's influence as well, especially with the lyrics. John just completely was as brutally honest about his life in a way that, you never heard before. And I think that's with Yoko's influence. Also, from watching this documentary, Above Us Only Sky, you saw how Yoko was involved with the whole creative process of the album, and not just the song Imagine, which was a big influence. You listen to a song like Cold Turkey, the screaming and the groaning from John at the end.
I had that on my notes. Yeah, that's Yoko. It has to be Yoko influence,
So it's all there. And the fact that he made sometime in New York City an album that was half John, half Yoko. They wrote songs together. A few of the songs from John have an Oriental feel to it, like Oh My Love, which is a co-write with Yoko. I think Beautiful Boy has that feeling to it as well. And Double Fantasy and posthumously Milk and Honey were half and half, John and Yoko. They planned on touring together in 1972 with Elephant Memory, John and Yoko, with Yoko songs. They also planned on touring together after Double Fantasy came out. So he was always thinking about partnering with Yoko. She wasn't just his wife to him. She was a creative partner through most of everything that he did.
Yep, absolutely. And Ken, we had a comment down here, Harry Benson, and he said that the documentary Above Us Only Sky, which we've talked about in a previous episode, and he mentioned how surprised he was that Yoko was so involved in the making of the Imagine album and really, kind of made him rethink, her role. So Dr. Ken, were you surprised at the amount of involvement she had in the album, or was it something that you kind of suspected?
No, I would agree with that. I think that was, in many ways, that was their heyday, that period. It's a very different partnership, the way you move through the 70s. I think we should be honest that she had an enormous influence, really, even on the Beatles in 1968 and 69, in very good ways, and gave us, even from the sidelines and sometimes in the throes of the band, she helped to create spaces of creativity that I think are very important. Having said that, while there's so much to adore from John Lennon's solo catalog, there is a very different level of quality when you look at pure aesthetics that does not have a lasting mark from the 1970s. I think because of that, I think the quality of the and aesthetics are ultimately how we measure great art. I think that's what's going to win out. And the relationship with Paul McCartney and what they created is hard to compare to anything, and for the very sheer reason that it's an outlier, right? It is not like anything else. And that's not to say that the Lennon Ono was like anything else either, but aesthetically, it's not of the same quality. I do find it interesting, as one of our listeners, viewers noted earlier, that it was coming up that sort of brought John out of his shell.
Yeah.
And I think he was rethinking that part of his life and that partnership in the last months of his life. There's a heartbreaking moment during an interview, I think in September 1980 or October, where John is talking about Paul and calling him my dear one, that just brings a tear to his eye, my eye. John wasn't crying, he was saying moving. The tears were misplaced as tears go by. Wrong band. But, it's fun to have these conversations, but I don't know that history will have such a problem with this kind of issue. And, of course, and I've said this before, and this is the great challenge whenever we talk about anything to do with the Beatles after December 8th, 1980. Here we have a person who was yanked out of the world, right? So these are always unfinished, unsettled questions. They can't be solved and resolved. And that's a very difficult issue to fathom, particularly when you look at the song that they were working on completing that very night. I think Walking on Thin Ice was such a harbinger of so many interesting things to come. I spent the weekend listening to all of the different takes of it and sort of tracing its evolution from the Double Fantasy sessions and Yoko's poem to those very last moments in the studio. And it's really remarkable, the kind of artistry that was going into that recording. Right. It would have been so damned interesting to see where that was going to go. And that was one of the thousands of things of which we were robbed on that terrible evening.
Right. Yeah.
That's
it's like, and if Paul was the biggest influence, why didn't they make that, the writing sessions that they were supposed to have in 75 work? Yeah, I know they had that little, snort and snore or whatever you call it, moment in the studio, but I mean, that wasn't nothing. I mean, but then here he is, he goes back to Yoko instead of, reforming his, this great, dynamic duo relationship he had with Paul.
Well, let's be frank at that point. This could take us into territory for another show that maybe we don't want to read some of the stuff that, like it or not, Kit was warning us about earlier. And, once you start to draw on historical, in some cases conjecture, in other cases fact, we have to start drawing very different lines around this. So I was trying to stay in the aesthetic.
Yeah.
John really wanted to go to New Orleans, though. I'm pretty confident about that.
Right.
Can I just add
But, I mean, it was also Paul's influence that helped, get John and Yoko back together. So
exactly.
maybe John wanted to see Dr. John. Who knows?
Yeah, that's right. All right, Ken, you wanted to add something. Ken?
I just wanted to say I respectfully disagree with Ken W. about John Lennon's solo work. I do think that so much of it is highly underrated. And even though John would cite Plastic Ono Band, Imagine, and Double Fantasy as among his best works, I think Mind Games and Walls and Bridges were very strong albums. And I like most of his stuff on Sometime in New York City. I think it's a really powerful, although way too short catalog from his solo career. I also think that people make way too big a deal out of maybe a couple of sentences that John said about coming up. I mean, he was impressed with Paul's song, but I don't think that really, in no way single-handedly did that convince him to go back into music. He was listening to other music at the time, as he said in Playboy with Blondie and the Talking Heads and Bruce Springsteen and the Cars and all this other music. And I think he was going to get back into music regardless of coming up, being a single on the charts at the time that he liked.
It may have also awakened his competitive streak, that
Maybe.
Paul had such a big hit, and he thought, okay, now I've got to step it up. So it could have been that as well. So, boy, this is a big topic. So
it was just the quality of coming up. We have to connect that with something John had said earlier, which was very much about seeing Paul push the boundaries a little bit. And that inspired him as much as anything else. That I believe the exact quote was, "This song is driving me crackers," which you could read several different ways. Frankly, crackers could be good or bad. I like crackers. A fine cracker. I don't like those bargain basement crackers. I like the good stuff. I think from what I've learned from talking to several of his contemporaries from that period, that what he really liked was that Paul was doing something kind of un-Paul, particularly with the kind of avant-garde sound he was getting. And that's something to be inspired by.
Okay.
Well, boy, there is. Probably we have to do part 2 of this episode sometime. There's so much to unpack.
We have that Mind Games episode.
Yeah, we gotta do the Mind Games episode, absolutely.
Whenever you're ready. Whenever you're ready.
Yep, let's do it. And I have to just give a shout out here to Tim Jackson, who says coming up from Nebworth 90 is a great version. Yes, it is, Tim. I like it too. So I have that album. So all right. So
Nebworth, yeah.
Yeah, yep, that was a pretty good version. All right, so to kind of wrap this up, let's kind of go around. So who do you think had the bigger influence on John? Was it Paul? Was it Yoko? Or can you not decide? Was it a mix of both? So Ken M, what do you think?
I'll go with Yoko.
Yoko.
But no doubt about it. I mean, Paul was so massively important to John Lennon's life and vice versa. Nobody can deny that. So don't think I'm diminishing Paul in any way by saying Yoko being a bigger influence.
Okay. All right. Tom, what do you think?
I'm unfortunately I can't hear or see Ken Michaels anymore, but I heard you say that he said Yoko, and by an ounce, as of right now at this point in my life, I'm going with Yoko as well. With the fact that he became a feminist because of him. I mean, the art with the bagism, the peace. They've always been peace and love, but he really took it a step further. The art with the 2 versions, the cover, and I just and Imagine being the most iconic song probably that he was his biggest influence from her was Imagine, and I think Ken Michaels said it a couple weeks ago in our last episode. 2 very popular radio stations, their last song they played was Imagine, and they also play that song every year for his birthday, I believe. A lot of radio stations at the same time play Imagine. I know they've done that in the past. I don't know if they've done that recently, but yeah, I go with Yoko.
All right, you go with Yoko. All right.
One more thing, you wouldn't have had Give Peace a Chance without Yoko. You wouldn't have had the Bed-Ins for Peace or all the peace activism with Yoko. I think John would have still been politically active, but not so blatant as he was with Yoko. Yeah. So
I agree with that. All right, Ken, what do you think?
It's Paul. It's a chicken and egg situation. We don't get to Yoko if we don't have Paul. He creates the artistic space, even helps John to create the commercial space that gets them there. As I said before, it's an unsettled question. We don't get to 1981. We don't know what happens with their relationship. And given that it was also a quasi-romantic relationship, that does have an effect on a relationship's longevity. So, human relationships are messy businesses, as we all know. But I have to go with Paul McCartney, hands down. It's the greatest songbook in the history of popular music. It continues to reverberate today and will long after, sadly, all of us, even Buddy here, have passed. And, Two Virgins won't be doing that.
Yeah.
But you look at
nobody's listening to it now.
Right. Well, true. But I mean, if
we don't
know. Influence, it's the capacity to have an effect on character, development, or behavior. And
go there. We're gonna go there. We're gonna start violating Kit's dictum.
Gonna get the ruler out, Tom.
Yeah, historical fact that does not work well in terms of part of this discussion.
Yep. Well, and as for me, I mean, boy, is this close. This is so close because they were influential in different ways, but I guess I would have to say, like Ken just said, the chicken or the egg. I guess I would have to say Paul, because Paul was John's first influence, really helped him to learn about songwriting. And then Yoko certainly then, helped him go in another direction with it. And I like what you said, Ken, earlier about creative spaces, creating, that. And I absolutely think she did that, allowed him the space to be really, creative and expand, what he was already doing and take chances. But to get there, he had to learn, other skills first. And that's probably during his time with Paul. But I mean, this is a tough call. So I think this is something that I hope you guys will also continue in the discussion. Whether you're watching this later or listening to it, we want to hear what you have to say. And I have a feeling we're going to be revisiting this topic in the future. There's a lot to unpack here. So I think it's about time to wrap it up. So let's just quickly go and if there's anything you want to mention that you're working on. So Dr. Ken, how about you? What's going
on? My new book, Solid State, The Story of Abbey Road and the End of the Beatles, will be coming out in October, perhaps earlier. Mm-hmm. And I'm proud to say that Yoko plays a positive role in it.
Nice.
So I look forward to being able to discuss it with you further. And as usual, I have a lot of other things in the works. I'm being blocked by a cat. I think Buddy's ready to go to bed is what this is. But I look forward to further parts of this discussion.
For sure. Absolutely. Tom, how about you?
Yeah, we've got our last two episodes of the third season of Two Legs is coming up. Our second to last is going to involve our pinch hitter, Mean Mr. Mayo. He did a episode about the rivalry of Paul and John in their solo career, going album by album and comparing the two. So that should be up in a day or two. So looking forward to that. Our last episode, David, my co-host, he reviewed the Denny Lane show that he saw in Detroit, and I got to, do a little bit more review of the wonderful suitcase that's we're all still talking about. So
I understand you're gonna have a duffel bag version out later.
Yes, here's my money. Take it, please. Take it.
They should just have PayPal connections to it.
Yeah, and I was also mentioned Ed Chen earlier. He had me on his show when they was Fab, and we discussed a lot of the songs that Paul uses for bonus tracks and songs that he leaves off the albums that we discover later on, whether they're a B-side or bonus editions for more editions of albums that he releases. So like the Wonderful Egypt Station. So that's what's going on right now.
Fantastic. And I'm actually later tonight on Bumps Radio England, I'm hosting my last Bottomless Soul segment. I had to step down from it because I have a book that I really want to get done by the end of the year, and I've got a lot of projects going, presentations, so I had to cut back on it. So it will be tonight, if you're watching this live, at 11:30 on Bumps Radio England. You can find the link on my Facebook page, and I'm not going away totally on that station. I'll be back for some guest spots and that kind of thing. And amazingly, I too am on Ed Chen's show. When they was fab, where we talk about mania, like fan mania. Are there any bands or artists that equal what the Beatles, the sensation the Beatles created? And so we go from List to BTS. It's really it's a long-ranging show. So the first part's up this week. So again, go to the When They Was Fab page, or you can check out my Facebook page. And I think those are the two main things. My concert review is up at Something Else Reviews, and my columns will be returning very soon. So last but not least, Mr. Michaels.
Oh, I hope you tackle the Bay City Rollers in that show.
Yeah, they do come up.
Okay, good. Well, let me tell you, I got a few things in the fire here. On my website, kenmichaelsradio.com, there is a weekly trivia and games page. Every single week, there's some new trivia question or game. You can win one of 9 prizes. This is my new prize here, the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. And this is the limited edition deluxe. It's got 2 CDs in it, a DVD, a Blu-ray, and a 48-page booklet. As we well know, it's got the Dirty Mac in there with John and Yoko, Keith Richards, Eric Clapton, and Mitch Mitchell doing Your Blues. There's an alternate take of Your Blues in here as well. Plus, there's a rehearsal of them doing Revolution, and they have something called a warm-up jam included. And you can win this as one of 9 prizes on the website. Also, last week, I had the pleasure of interviewing Terry Crane. Terry Crane is the author of this book that came out in January called NEMS and the Business of Selling Beatles Merchandise from 1964 to 1966. And it's all about each of the items. There's 150 items that came out here in the United States from the company that Brian Epstein started that did the licensing, called Celtab or Celtabe. There's 2 different pronunciations. It's the stories behind all of the products here, and also the history of Brian and the problems he had with that company as well. So that's on my interviews page 4 page. And later on this week, I'm going to give everyone a chance to win this in a special contest signed by Terry Crane. And then on my podcast show, Things We Said Today, we just did a great show with Ken McNabb. And Ken is the author of this new book, And in the End, all about the year 1969, all that the Beatles went through in that year. And so that's on Podbean. It's also on iTunes and YouTube, just like our show is. You can catch one more thing, my live show of Every Little Thing, which is Wednesday nights on WNHU, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can stream at WNHU.org. It's Beatle music, solo Beatle music, thematic sets, and the latest Beatle news. I know Tom's like a regular listener. So if you can, please catch the show this Wednesday at 8.
Fantastic. We are all very busy people. And of course, follow us on Twitter at TalkMoreTalk1. You can email us at talkmoresolotalk@gmail.com. As you can see, we read your comments. We take them seriously. You might just find them on a future episode. So thank you all for tuning in, for all your great comments. Please keep them going. We love to hear what you have to say. So from Ken Womack, Ken Michaels, Tom Hunyadi, this is Kid O'Toole saying, don't say goodnight.
Very good.
Happy birthday, Paul.
Happy birthday, Paul.
And happy birthday, Paul. Absolutely. Bye, everybody.
Talk